But first up, we want to check in on the Queensland state budget. It was delivered today by the Treasurer Cameron Dick. It was his first budget and it has revealed a debt trail for decades to come. $120 billion from the state of Queensland is where the debt is headed. I'm joined now by the Shadow Treasurer, David Janetzki from Brisbane. Thanks for joining us, David. This debt situation is a real worry, isn't it? Not just in Queensland, of course, right around the country, but $120 billion for a state the size of Queensland is a massive debt to pay off ever.
It is, Chris, and it's great to have you in sunny Queensland as well, so welcome. Today, what we've seen with the Queensland budget was a terrible breach of promise. Just before the election, we only voted a month ago. The Treasurer here in Queensland only talked about $4 billion being borrowed, and now today we discovered it would be $28 billion. And that's not for anything more significant than keeping the lights on here in Queensland. And so people across Queensland, they are shaking their heads at what we have witnessed here today.
But it's this long-term debt of $120, $130 billion. People need to know that there's some way in the future of paying that off. Would the LNP look at privatisations in the future to try and get rid of that debt? I mean, how do you see Queensland ever paying that debt down?
Well, the problem we've got with this debt, Chris, is the question has to be asked, what is it being borrowed for? If it's being borrowed to build infrastructure, economically driven projects, congestion-busting ideas, that's one thing. But what we've got here is debt only being created to keep the lights on. We've seen in New South Wales really stimulus-driven budgets that have focused on that kind of infrastructure growth. Here in Queensland, there is no such vision. There is no such drive to grow the pie, to grow economic development, and Queenslanders will suffer in the longer term. Like in New South Wales, Chris, what we have there is a doubling in the infrastructure spend compared to Queensland. So that shows here again in Queensland, there is a lack of vision. There is a lack of ideas from a Labor government that frankly, Chris, these guys, they had cooked the budget well before COVID. I think sometimes people forget that and we need to ram that home. They'd taken debt already before COVID from $72 billion when Anastasia Palaszczuk became Premier to $102 billion, and this was all before COVID. They'd raided $17 billion in taxes and other mechanisms from the budget.
David Janetzki, let me jump in there.
This is not just a COVID problem.
Let me jump in there. Yeah, let me jump in there because you had that argument in the lead up to the election and Anastasia Palaszczuk and Labor got re-elected handsomely. Let me ask you about borders because the LNP toyed a bit during the year of criticising these hard borders. You didn't really want to go too hard because they seemed popular inside Queensland. Do we need some guarantees that whether it's Queensland or Western Australia or New South Wales, that we don't see these hard borders slapped up willy-nilly in the future?
Yeah, well, it's great to have the borders open today again, Chris, now, and the free flow of people and movement of businesses and families. And we've seen some wonderful, reunions today and businesses delighted with the reopening here. What we need to see into the future is this health advice. We need to make sure that everybody is aware of the decisions that are being made and the basis that these decisions are being made. So what we've been focused on since the election, in particular, is to make sure that this border advice is publicly available. Any health advice, we'll keep pushing for that to be released because businesses need to know and families, they need to know. Everybody needs to know the basis on which decisions are being made, and that's why we'll continue to keep advocating for the release of that health advice.
All right, David, thanks for joining us.
Great, thanks, Chris.